What's a thing that is dangerously close to collapse that you know about? I was driving through Kansas last summer when I noticed something weird. Irrigation sprinklers blasting water into the air like it was an unlimited resource. I mentioned it to my uncle, a farmer, and he just sighed. "That's the Ogallala Aquifer," he said. "We're sucking it dry." Turns out all those golden fields aren't just the work of good old-fashioned rain. They're the result of ancient water being pumped up from underground. And once it's gone, Dust Bowl 2.0. We've known for a century that farming in western Kansas was unsustainable, but we just kept pumping like the water would magically come back. Spoiler, it won't. Some people thought aquifers worked like a bank account you could just scale back from. Nah, it's more like drilling oil. Once it's gone, it's gone. Guess we'll just have to switch to Gatorade since it has all the electrolytes plants need. The last time I drove through the Central Valley, I was shocked by the amount of spray irrigation going on. Like, I get it, crops need water. But at the same time, I wasn't allowed to wash my hands at Hearst Castle because of the drought. Meanwhile, the Israelis figured out drip irrigation 70 years ago, but we still insist on blasting water into the dry air and hoping a few drops hit the plants. Why? Because we've always done it that way. Also, have you seen how the ground is sinking? That's from overpumping the aquifers, and in some places once they collapse, they can't be refilled at all. But hey, at least we have above-ground storage, right? I walked into CVS the other day to pick up my prescription, and I swear it looked like a post-apocalyptic movie set. Dust on the shelves, half the products locked behind glass, and one poor pharmacist running around like a contestant on a game show. I asked if they were short-staffed, and she just laughed, long and hollow, like someone who had seen the void and accepted it. Apparently, back in the day, they had 10 full-time techs and 3 pharmacists. Now? Half the staff is gone, but the workload is the same. Every quarter, corporate demands more profits, so they cut payroll, which makes the service worse, which drives customers away, which leads to even more payroll cuts. Rinse and repeat. I ended up switching to a small local pharmacy where they actually know my name, but I'm half convinced CVS stores are just going to slowly turn into empty husks with a single cashier guarding a vault of locked-up deodorant. The last time I was in the U.S., I went to a Walgreens to buy a knee brace. It wasn't in a glass case, but the pegs they were hanging on had a locking mechanism built into the price tag. Pressed the button for assistance. Waited. 2 minutes. 5 minutes. 7 minutes. Eventually, I just started wandering the aisles, first looking for an employee, then just looking for any sign of human life. In this massive store, I found exactly 2 people working. A pharmacist, understandably glued to the counter, and a cashier, understandably stuck at the register. Both used their radios to call someone, and we waited. After 20 minutes, I pulled out my pocket knife, snipped the tag, and took the knee brace to the register. Suddenly, 2 Walgreens employees materialized at one end of the aisle, and 2 security guards appeared at the other, meaning they saw me wandering around looking for help and chose to ignore me until they thought I was shoplifting. At that point, I decided that if I ever need something, I'm just ordering from Amazon. Florida citrus is dying, and we're just kind of pretending it isn't happening. There's this disease called citrus greening, and once a tree gets it, it's doomed. The problem is, you don't even know it's sick until about 2 years in, by which point the infection has already spread. No cure. The only solution is cutting down infected trees and hoping for the best. A lot of farmers are just giving up and selling their land. OJ prices have already jumped 300% in 2 years, and that's with imports trying to soften the blow. The worst part? It's not just oranges. Beekeepers are getting hit hard too. Our last batch of orange blossom honey was only 10% of what we usually get. Between the citrus collapse and the drought, we lost up to 50% of our hives. No citrus, no bees, no honey. And we just keep moving along like everything's fine. I live in Massachusetts, and there's this bridge in my town that was built 40 years ago as a temporary structure. It gets 25,000 cars crossing it every single day. You can actually walk under it, and let me tell you, when you look up and see the rusted-out sections barely holding together, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Last year, a truck crossed it, and one of the panels seesawed up into the gas tank. Spilled about 100 gallons of diesel into the river below. That river had a marshy area near the bridge, and you could see the fuel slick collecting there like some kind of toxic soup. The city and state have known for decades that this bridge needs replacing, and their response is always, "It'll last for now." Sure, they say a new one will be built by 2028, but we all know how that works. If this thing collapses, everyone will act shocked, but honestly, the only surprise is that it's still standing at all. The American middle class feels like a myth at this point. You're either upper middle class or you're just barely scraping by. Someone told me the only difference between middle class and working poor is home ownership, and honestly, it tracks. Rent is eating everyone alive. I inherited an 80-year-old house from my dad, and yeah, it's old as hell, but it's mine. No HOA, cheap taxes, small dying town. If I had to pay rent and live somewhere with a real commute, I'd probably be sleeping in my car. I don't know how people are affording this, like how are people paying rent, car loans, groceries, medical bills, utilities, and still having enough left to exist? The truth is, most people aren't. The whole system is teetering on the edge, and it's only going to take one spark before things get real interesting. I teach 4th grade, and I am this close to busting up the black market running out of the girls' bathroom. These little entrepreneurs are dealing in Pokemon cards, snacks, mechanical pencils, and even sunglasses. I respect the hustle, but some of them are straight-up price gouging. I caught one kid selling a half-used pack of gum for $5. A half-used pack. I let it slide because honestly they're still doing a better job at economics than most corporations. That being said, I am hunting the kingpin. I don't know who's at the top yet, but someone is running this operation, and I will find them. Until then, I'm keeping a close eye on every suspiciously well-stocked backpack. I was talking to an old friend who's a doctor, and he straight up told me that the U.S. healthcare system isn't just expensive, it's on the verge of collapsing. Not because of costs, which are bad enough, but because we literally don't have enough doctors, nurses, or specialists to keep things running. Everyone's burned out. Almost every doctor he knows is either planning to retire early or cut back on hours because the job is slowly crushing them. There aren't enough medical schools, residencies are limited, and pre-med programs are designed to weed people out. Meanwhile, the doctors who do make it are drowning in paperwork, bureaucracy, and patients who are convinced they have the rarest disease imaginable because they Googled their symptoms. So when your hospital has a 6-hour ER wait time, that's not a staffing shortage, that's the future. I used to think antibiotics were like magic. Just take some and you're good. Turns out we've been way too casual with them, and now bacteria are basically leveling up into supervillains. Doctors have been warning us for years that overprescribing antibiotics would lead to resistance, but nobody listened. Now we've got infections that just laugh at medicine. It's not just people either. Pesticides are failing too. Resistance is creeping into everything. We're running out of effective antibiotics, and new ones aren't being developed fast enough. At this rate, a simple scrape on your knee could be a real problem in a few decades. Maybe I should start carrying around hand sanitizer like my life depends on it, because soon it just might. The food chain is falling apart and no one seems to care. Insect populations have plummeted. We're talking a 60% drop in just a few decades. In some places, it's closer to 75%. And yeah, bugs might be annoying, but they also happen to be crucial for, pollination. No bees, no food. It's already affecting things. Last year, beekeepers were reporting massive losses, and Florida's orange blossom honey supply was down to 10% of normal levels. That's not just bad for honey, it means fewer bees around to pollinate anything. Most biologists agree we're in the middle of a mass extinction event, but nobody's really doing anything about it. At this rate, we're all going to be eating lab-grown cricket protein in 20 years and wondering what went wrong. Florida real estate is the biggest scam running right now. People are still buying up million-dollar beachfront homes like the state isn't sinking. Most of Florida is barely 3 feet above sea level, and every year, flooding gets worse. And yet, housing prices just keep going up. We all understand that in 50 years, a big chunk of Florida is going to be underwater, right? You'd think that'd make property values drop, but nope. People just keep throwing money at doomed houses. Hope they enjoy their beachfront property while it lasts, because in a few decades it's going to be oceanfront. There's a bridge in my town that's been standing since the 80s. It was supposed to be temporary, but, well, 40 years later, here we are. It carries 25,000 cars a day, and you can feel it sway when you drive over it. If you walk underneath it, you'll see rusted sections barely holding together. 6 months ago, a truck crossed it, and the road literally seesawed up into its gas tank, dumping 100 gallons of diesel into the river below. The city's been saying for years that they'll replace it soon. The current plan is for 2028, but let's be real, that means maybe 2030. The only thing more terrifying than this bridge still standing is the fact that most of our infrastructure is just as bad. The U.S. power grid is basically a house of cards held together with duct tape and a prayer. A lot of people don't realize that without constant human intervention, the entire thing would fall apart within a day. Some grids could last 24 hours, but others? 6 hours tops. A single bad winter storm can knock out power for millions, and we've already seen what happens when Texas freezes over. We're one cyber attack or solar flare away from a full-on blackout, and honestly, I don't think most of us would last a week without electricity. Every time I see people laughing about preppers, I remember that a lot of them are just planning for the inevitable. Lowell, Massachusetts has a bridge that should have been condemned years ago, but the city just keeps pretending it's fine. It was built as a temporary structure in the 80s, but now 25,000 cars use it every day. You can feel it move as you cross it, and the rust underneath looks like something out of a horror movie. 6 months ago, a truck drove over it, and a piece of the bridge literally flipped up into its gas tank, spilling diesel everywhere. The river underneath now has a permanent oil slick. The state knows this bridge is a death trap, but they keep saying it'll last for now. The replacement? Maybe 2028, assuming it doesn't collapse first. When I was a kid, school bus drivers were always old, and now I finally understand why. Nobody in their right mind would do this job unless they were retired and just wanted some extra cash. The pay is garbage. They don't even get full-time hours, and their schedule is ridiculous. Who can work a couple of hours in the morning, then clock out for hours, then come back for another short shift? It's like the job was designed to be impossible. Schools are begging for drivers, but they refuse to actually pay them enough. And it turns out, people aren't willing to drive a massive vehicle full of kids for minimum wage and zero benefits. Shocking. The young childcare industry is hanging by a thread. Daycares have all these new safety regulations, which are great. But they've made running one stupidly expensive. You need more certified teachers, but the pay is so low it's comparable to fast food. Except fast food actually offers benefits. I saw a daycare listing $14/hour for infant care. Meanwhile, a gas station down the street was paying $16/hour with 401k matching to ring up snacks. Owners can't afford to pay teachers more, but parents can't afford to pay higher tuition. So now, daycares are shutting down left and right, and I don't know what the plan is when there's literally nowhere left to take your kid. There's a 4th grade black market running out of my classroom, and I will find the kingpin. These kids are dealing in Pokemon cards, snacks, mechanical pencils, you name it. I caught one kid selling a half-used pack of gum for $5. A half-used pack. I respect the hustle, but they're price gouging their classmates like a post-apocalyptic supply chain. The worst part? They're actually running it like a legit operation. They have suppliers, distributors, and even a little muscle to handle disputes. Honestly, I'm a little impressed. But make no mistake, I will take them down eventually. Maybe after I figure out who's selling the good mechanical pencils. Every time I step into a drugstore, I feel like we lost a war. Half the shelves are empty, the other half are covered in dust, and everything worth buying is locked behind glass. Last week, I needed deodorant. Pressed the little call for assistance button, waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Eventually, I just started looking for an employee. Found one lonely cashier who sighed like she had seen some things and radioed for help. 10 more minutes. Nothing. Meanwhile, there were at least 2 security guards near the entrance watching everything. So let me get this straight. There's no staff to sell me deodorant, but there's plenty of security to make sure I don't steal it? Yeah, I'm just ordering it online next time. I went to Walgreens the other day to grab a knee brace, and I swear it was like breaking into Fort Knox. The knee braces weren't in a case, but they were locked onto the shelf with some weird mechanism that required an employee to unlock them. Pressed the call button, waited, walked around looking for help, found no one. Finally, after 20 minutes, I took out my pocket knife and snipped the tab myself. Immediately, 2 employees appeared at one end of the aisle and 2 security guards showed up at the other. So they were watching me the whole time but chose not to help until they thought they caught me stealing. Joke's on them. I paid for it anyway. But yeah, not going back unless I have to. If you think the American middle class still exists, I have some fantastic beachfront property to sell you in Florida. Rent is skyrocketing, wages are stagnating, and the only people who seem to be doing okay are the ones who bought their homes before everything went completely off the rails. Someone told me the only difference between the middle class and the working poor is homeownership, and honestly, that checks out. I inherited an old house from my dad. Cheap taxes, no HOA, middle of nowhere, and that's the only reason I'm not drowning. If I had to pay modern rent on top of everything else, I'd be living in my car. The system is cracking, and we all know it. Just waiting for the moment it finally breaks. The U.S. power grid is one bad day away from absolute chaos. I don't think people realize just how fragile it is. Without constant human intervention, most grids wouldn't last more than 6 to 24 hours before they completely fail. One well-placed cyber attack or a major storm, and suddenly everything goes dark. We saw what happened in Texas, one freeze and the whole system collapsed. And that was just Texas. Imagine a national-scale blackout. The grocery stores would empty in hours. No gas pumps, no ATMs, no internet, and people laugh at preppers like they're crazy. If anything, they're too optimistic. The Florida citrus industry is circling the drain and nobody's talking about it. There's this disease called citrus greening, and it's wiping out groves left and right. The worst part? It takes years for an infected tree to show symptoms, so by the time a farmer realizes there's a problem, it's already too late. There's no cure. The only solution is to cut down infected trees and hope the rest survive. A lot of farmers are just giving up and selling their land. Meanwhile, orange juice prices have tripled in the last 2 years. Give it a few more years, and Florida oranges might just be a thing of the past. Infrastructure in the U.S. is held together with hope, duct tape, and politicians pretending everything is fine. Most of our underground water pipes, electrical grids, and sewer systems are ancient. Cities are sitting on repair bills in the tens or hundreds of millions, but instead of fixing things, they just keep pushing the deadlines further and further, hoping the next guy will deal with it. Eventually, something big is going to fail, and we'll all act shocked as if we didn't see it coming. Teachers are bailing on education so fast it's scary. Veteran teachers are taking early retirement in droves, and new teachers burn out within a few years. The pay sucks, the workload is ridiculous, and the respect? Non-existent. Parents blame teachers for everything, administrators blame teachers for everything, and the students? A lot of them don't even want to be there. Our teachers is basically a support group at this point. When we finally run out of teachers, all those parents who spent years yelling at them will suddenly have to homeschool their kids. Good luck with that. School bus drivers get paid less than fast food workers, and people wonder why there aren't enough of them. I have a CDL, and there is no way I'd take that job. The pay is garbage, the hours are terrible, and you get zero benefits. Most drivers aren't even full-time. They work a few hours in the morning, then sit unpaid for hours before clocking back in for the afternoon shift. Who can afford to work like that? That's why every bus driver you see looks like they retired from something else and just wanted some extra cash. Schools are begging for drivers, but until they actually pay a living wage, nothing's going to change. The insect apocalypse is happening right now, and nobody seems to care. We've lost over half of the world's insect biomass in the last 35 years. In some areas, it's closer to 75%. That's insane. People joke about hating bugs, but they're the foundation of the food chain. No bugs, no pollination, no pollination, no crops, no crops, no food. It's already hitting beekeepers hard. Orange blossom honey yields in Florida are way down because of citrus greening and droughts. It's all connected. And we're just sitting here watching it happen like it's a Netflix documentary instead of real life. The American daycare system is one bad month away from imploding. Between new safety regulations, teacher certification requirements, and the insane cost of running a facility, it's nearly impossible to keep a daycare open. Parents can't afford higher tuition, but owners can't afford to pay teachers enough to keep them from quitting. I saw a daycare hiring for $14 an hour to care for infants. Meanwhile, the gas station down the street was offering $16 an hour plus 401k matching. So guess what? Nobody wants to work in childcare anymore. And when daycare starts shutting down, what's the backup plan? Hope grandma's available? The fourth-grade black market in my classroom is getting out of control. Pokemon cards, snacks, pencils, even sunglasses, they're flipping everything. I tried cracking down on it, but they just got smarter. Now they're running transactions in the bathroom, passing notes coded like an underground operation. The worst part? They've got supply chains. I confiscated a stash of mechanical pencils last week, and 2 days later they had more. Somebody in this school is the plug, and I will find them. But honestly, I respect the hustle, just hoping they don't figure out NFTs. Every time I drive through the Central Valley, it feels like a bad joke. On one side of the highway, massive farms are shooting water into the air like they've never heard of a drought. On the other side, entire towns have signs up warning residents about water restrictions. I once stopped at a rest area, and the bathrooms were closed because of water shortages. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, fields were being sprayed with enough water to drown a small town. The best part? The ground is literally sinking because we've drained the aquifers so badly that the earth is collapsing in on itself. But sure, let's just keep doing things the way we've always done them. There's a Walgreens near my place that looks like it's been through 3 zombie apocalypses. Half the products are locked up, the shelves are covered in dust, and I swear the lights are dimmer every time I go in. Last week, I needed some allergy meds and made the mistake of asking for help. Pressed the button, waited, looked for an employee, found one, just one, and she looked tired. "We're short-staffed," she sighed, radioing for someone to unlock the case. 10 minutes later, still nothing. But hey, at least security was fully staffed. They had plenty of people watching to make sure I didn't try to steal my own Claritin. The future of retail is just empty stores where you can see the products, but aren't allowed to buy them. The Colorado River is running out of water, but don't worry. Arizona sold off a chunk of its groundwater to Saudi Arabia, because apparently alfalfa farming is illegal in Saudi Arabia due to how much water it uses, so instead, they're growing it in our desert. Meanwhile, an entire Arizona community called Rio Verde decided they didn't want to pay taxes, so they built homes just outside of Scottsdale's city limits without securing a water source. Scottsdale spent years warning them that they'd be cut off, and sure enough, on January 1st, 2023, it happened. Residents were shocked. They protested at the Super Bowl, parading their dehydrated kids around like props. Eventually, they caved and accepted what Scottsdale had been telling them the whole time. Imagine literally running out of water and still thinking you're the smartest person in the room. A 4th grader tried to bribe me last week. Straight up slid a mechanical pencil across my desk and whispered, "This is for you." I looked at it, then at him, and asked what he was really up to. Turns out the underground economy in my classroom is more sophisticated than I ever imagined. Kids are flipping Pokemon cards, snacks, school supplies. You name it. There's even interest rates. I caught one kid lending out Skittles with a repayment plan. The worst part? They're better at supply chains than most major corporations. I confiscated a batch of overpriced snacks, and 2 days later they had new stock. I know I should shut it down, but honestly, I'm impressed. I saw a job listing for a daycare worker that paid less than my local gas station. $14 an hour to care for infants. Meanwhile, down the street, the gas station was hiring for $16 an hour, plus a 401k. Imagine working all day with screaming toddlers, changing diapers and making sure nobody dies, only to find out you'd make more money selling energy drinks and scratch tickets. That's why childcare is imploding. Daycare owners can't afford to pay more, parents can't afford to pay higher tuition, and the workers? They're bailing. If you think the teacher shortage is bad, just wait until daycares start shutting down left and right. What's the backup plan? Just duct tape the baby to your desk while you work from home? I have no idea how people afford to live anymore. I used my dad's inheritance to buy an old house. No HOA, cheap taxes, middle of nowhere. It's old as hell, but it's mine. And honestly, that's the only reason I'm not drowning. I look at rent prices and wonder how anyone is surviving. A friend of mine pays twice what I do just to rent a tiny apartment, and that's before food, gas, insurance, or medical bills. People say, just save money. But with what? The only difference between middle class and working poor these days is whether or not you managed to buy a house before everything went to hell. The rest of us? We're hanging on by a thread. I asked my doctor how things were going, and he just laughed. Turns out we don't just have a cost problem in U.S. healthcare. We have a people problem. There aren't enough doctors, nurses, or specialists to handle the workload, and the ones still hanging on are burning out. Hospitals are desperate for staff, but medical schools haven't increased enough to keep up. Meanwhile, pre-med programs are designed to weed people out, so we're actively making it harder to train new doctors. His exact words? If you think waiting for an appointment is bad now, give it 5 years. So yeah, the system is on fire, and we're out of water. Sounds about right. The U.S. power grid is terrifyingly fragile, like way more fragile than people realize. Most grids only last 6 to 24 hours without constant human intervention. If something goes wrong, cyber attack, natural disaster, even just a really bad storm, everything shuts down. We saw it in Texas when their grid collapsed during a cold snap. That was just one state. Imagine if it happened on a national scale. No power means no gas pumps, no ATMs, no running water in some places. Grocery stores would be empty in a day. And people still laugh at preppers like they're the crazy ones. If anything, they might be the only ones actually paying attention. I read an article about antibiotic resistance and have been spiraling ever since. We overuse antibiotics so much that bacteria are just evolving around them. Doctors warned us about this for years, and now we have infections that straight up don't care about medicine anymore. Not just in humans. Pesticides are failing too. Everything is building resistance. We're getting closer and closer to a world where a paper cut could kill you. And the worst part? Pharmaceutical companies don't even want to make new antibiotics because they aren't profitable enough. So enjoy modern medicine while it lasts, I guess. The U.S. education system is clinging to life. Veteran teachers are quitting early, new teachers are burning out, and the ones who stay are just trying to survive. It's like a slow-motion train wreck, and nobody in charge is doing anything to stop it. Meanwhile, Our Teachers is basically a therapy group for people who have realized that nobody respects them. Pay is garbage, parents are worse, and somehow, everything is the teacher's fault. When we finally run out of teachers, I can't wait to see all the people who screamed at them for years suddenly have to homeschool their own kids. Good luck with that. I drove over a bridge last week that was supposed to be temporary 40 years ago. It gets 25,000 cars a day, and if you walk underneath it, you can see the rusted-out sections. 6 months ago, a truck drove over it, and a piece of the bridge flipped up into its gas tank, spilling 100 gallons of diesel into the river below. That river had a marshy area near the bridge, and now there's just a permanent oil slick. The government keeps saying, it'll last for now. Yeah, sure, the replacement is scheduled for 2028, which means we'll maybe see it in 2030, assuming it doesn't collapse first.